Welcome to PhD&D everyone, I'm Dr. Bowers, and over the last few years I've made a few dozen videos about Ravenloft Domains of Dread, those little patches of Shadowfell, each of which is an ironic hell for its Dark Lord ruler, as well as a certain kind of horror-themed setting for your adventurers. At the same time, I've also been trying out various TTRPGs outside of Dungeons & Dragons. So of course it occurred to me to wonder many times, which TTRPGs outside of Dungeons & Dragons are good for Ravenloft? Or rather, for Ravenloft adventures. So I sat down and I tried a fun little exercise. What I tried was listing all of the different TTRPGs outside of Dungeons & Dragons which I've tried over the last couple of years, either as a game master or as a player or both. And for each of those TTRPGs, I assigned a group of Ravenloft Domains of Dread. I divided the Ravenloft Domains of Dread among the different TTRPGs that I've been trying, in other words, with some arbitrary restrictions that I added for fun. Rule number 1, I cannot list the same Domain of Dread twice. This prevents me from overusing a Domain of Dread, so if I think one Domain of Dread is really good for Call of Cthulhu, I can't also recommend it for Heart the City Beneath. Rule number 2, or arbitrary restriction number 2, each TTRPG system gets at most 3 Domains of Dread assigned to it. This is to prevent me from assigning all of the domains to one particular game that I like a whole lot, as well as letting me play to what I know, since I'm not intimately familiar with all of the Domains of Dread as they're listed in Van Richten's guide yet, so I don't want to burden myself with the task of going through all of the Domains of Dread and assigning each one of those to a TTRPG. And finally, I'm ignoring TTRPGs which I've tried recently that are either previous editions of Dungeons & Dragons or extensions of or variations on Dungeons & Dragons. This includes Dungeon Crawl Classics, X-Crawl Classics, the MCDM RPG Draw Steel, stuff like that. More specifically, I'm going to go through the following TTRPG systems and give each one 3 Domains of Dread. 3 domains that would run really well with that TTRPG system's rules and mechanics and themes. They are the Alien RPG, Bluebeard's Bride, Call of Cthulhu, Heart the City Beneath, Monster of the Week, Borg, Ryua, 10 Candles, 5 Acts The King in Yellow, and just for fun, The Extraordinary Adventures of Baron Munchausen. So let's get started. Number 1, the Alien RPG. The Alien RPG by Free League is really fun, and it's an excellent horror game. It's one of those horror games where your PC is very unlikely to survive. Or at least that's how things were in the cinematic mode of the game, which is what I played. In the cinematic mode, the PCs wake up from hypersleep because they got a distress call, or they sensed something, or there's a derelict ship that they picked up, and they've got instructions from corporate to check it out. As you can imagine, things don't go well, there's aliens on board. And one of the things that's really fun about this game is that each PC gets a separate set of motives, and these motives are set up to conflict with one another. So one PC might be the pilot, who cares about their ship first and foremost. They care about saving their ship. While another PC is going to be the corporate stooge, who has secret instructions to just gather alien samples and screw everything else. Or you could be the lovable janitor, who's a union guy who really just cares about the other members of the crew. As the danger and tension ratchet up, and as each PC tries to pursue their goal, they end up conflicting. And by the end of the first game I played, my character was shot in the head by the captain of the ship. It was awesome! So the best Ravenloft Domains of Dread to set in the Alien RPG are going to be ones where the PCs have to go to some unknown location and investigate things, where the PCs might have conflicting motives, and where they're all gonna die. The first of these, I think, is Sire 1313. This would be a really fun domain to run with the Alien RPG. Basically, the idea is that the PCs would board a train. They think they're going on an ordinary train ride. But something is off. The train seems deserted. They better split up and check it out. You could give the PCs independent motives that are related to the train or the journey. One PC just wants to get to the destination and sees the other PCs as instrumental to that end. Another PC could be fascinated with the supernatural and prone to investigating it and staying with it if they detect any on the train. And so on. You could make Sire 1313 a double-decker train, too, if you wanted to give it more space and make it more expansive like the corridors of a spaceship. I'd also say that the domain Lamortia would work really well for the Alien RPG. In this case, the PCs could be conscripted by some scientist of Lamortia. There's a scientist who has given them a mission, and the mission is to go and check out this old house. There's supposed to be some abandoned science equipment in there, and they need to get some of it. Or at least that could be one of the missions of one of the PCs, is get some of that equipment at any cost, while another PC might just want to keep the group alive and together, and another PC might just care about the money, and so on. The setup could be the same. They go into this gloomy, cavernous, multi-roomed place, they're exploring it, they're encouraged to turn on each other as things ratchet up. It would work really well. And finally, Valachan. I think Valachan would be a really interesting domain to run with the Alien RPG. Basically, you would pitch the idea as a jungle mission. The PCs are sent out into the jungle to investigate some mysterious patch. Oh, it could be like Annihilation, where they're going to go out and investigate the Shimmer, right? Different clearings and thickets and alcoves of the jungle can function like different rooms of a spaceship. And as the PCs uncover some of what they're sent on a mission to recover or investigate, there are also deadly jungle monsters. Maybe Chakuna herself. And you can give the PCs the separate motives and all that stuff. So there's the Alien RPG. For that one, if you're going to run Ravenloft, I'd run Sire 1313, Lamortia, or Valachan. Number 2. Bluebeard's Bride. I love Bluebeard's Bride by Magpie Games, and if you saw my video on Blaustein, the Ravenloft domain of dread that's themed around the myth of Bluebeard, you already know that. So obviously, one Ravenloft domain of dread that you could use with Bluebeard's Bride is Blaustein. That's kind of a no-brainer. And because it's a no-brainer, I thought it wasn't very interesting, so let me pick 3 other domains of dread for Bluebeard's Bride. Now, one of the things about Bluebeard's Bride is that each of the players control a certain aspect of the one point of view characters, the protagonist's psyche. In Bluebeard's Bride, it's the bride. The bride is given a ring of keys and she can explore the different rooms in Bluebeard's castle. And as she's exploring them, she's wondering, is her husband a monster or is he misunderstood? She investigates, the horrors mount, and eventually the bride is tempted to look behind the one door where she's told not to look, and she meets a terrible fate. Which one depends on how the game has proceeded. Now, the first Ravenloft domain of dread I thought would work well with Bluebeard's Bride is Tempest. Instead of playing on the themes and the horrors of patriarchy as Bluebeard's Bride does, you could play on themes and horrific ideas about parenthood, specifically from the perspective of children. Mama Lorinda seems to be a monster. There's something weird about her anyway. Granny with the green skin. She's left, and she's going to come back later. She said we could explore any room in her house, that big Wicker Man thing where she dwells, but she says there's that one room we're not allowed to go into. So, the PCs control the different aspects of this one child's psyche, and the child is led from room to explore different tokens or different signs of what Mama Lorinda is really like. Is she an evil child-eating witch? Or is she misunderstood? You can encounter similar sorts of horrors that are related to fears about parents being monsters to their kids and stuff. And at the end, the one PC that all the players are controlling are going to open up that forbidden door, and we're going to see which of the horrible fates they meet. I think you could also do something similar with the domain of Naranjan. Play around with the themes of authority and a guru, and the horrors of a cult of personality. The guru Naranjan has temporarily left, leaving us a run of the ashram. We can go into any chamber we wish, but we're forbidden to go to that one building that's separate at the very end, the far end of the ashram. We're not allowed to go there. The different PCs control different aspects of this one disciple, and the disciple moves around the ashram and they see these different horrific things. Do the horrific things show that Naranjan is actually a monster, or do they show that he's misunderstood? Horror mounts, tension mounts, and the disciple eventually has to open that door out of curiosity or whatever, and they meet some kind of horrible fate. That would be another way to run Bluebeard's Bride, playing with themes of pedagogy and authority rather than themes of strictly patriarchy as Bluebeard's Bride does. And finally, you could also play around with the guest-host relationship if you were running Daemon Liu with the rules for Bluebeard's Bride. Each of the PCs could control a psychological aspect of one awkward guest who has been invited to the masquerade for the very first time. The masquerade is so busy, everybody is all distracted, and so the PCs, although they know there's one room they're forbidden from opening, they do have the run of the mansion and they can open up all the other rooms and explore. What kind of person is their host exactly? Or their hostess, rather? What kind of person is Cedra de Honor? Is she a monster? Is she misunderstood? The PCs go from room to room investigating, tension mounts, horror mounts, eventually they open the forbidden door, etc. So there's Bluebeard's Bride. For that particular TTRPG, I would recommend the domains of Tempest, Naranjan, and Daemon Liu. Number 3, Call of Cthulhu. I really enjoyed playing Call of Cthulhu by Chaosium, and it has a captivating set of mechanics. There's this gameplay loop or gameplay structure where the PCs are all investigators. They're sent to investigate something, a mysterious disappearance, the emergence of a mysterious artifact, a piece of art that has gone missing, a fun party with a really bizarre and unique theme. They have to go and investigate that thing. When they investigate, they find a clue. The clue leads them to something horrible that drains their sanity. But in that moment, they find another clue. They follow that clue. They do some research, and then they find something horrible that drains their sanity, but another clue. And you repeat this until they're basically out of sanity, and they have to go and retire as investigators. This game is modeled on and works very well with stories of Lovecraftian cosmic horror. And for that reason alone, I would recommend running the Ravenloft domain of Blutspur if you're going to run Ravenloft in Call of Cthulhu. Blutspur, at least as it's described in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, has a couple of layers to it. On one hand, there's just an ordinary, low-magic, mundane layer of ordinary people trying to live out their lives. But there's weird evidence of alien abductions, alien tampering, alien infiltration, certain people not being who they seem, that kind of paranoid alien abduction horror. And related to this, in some way that's yet to be elaborated by the DM in the adventure of their choosing, there's also this alien illithid homeworld. Kind of like the lost city of R'lyeh in Lovecraft. Just as in Call of Cthulhu, the players control investigators who are trying to figure out something only to discover alien horror beyond their comprehension, so do you get that kind of description in the description of Blutspur for Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. Indeed, I suspect that Blutspur was introduced and recast as a domain in Van Richten's Guide because they wanted something of a Call of Cthulhu flavor to the possibilities of D&D. I'd also recommend the domain of Borka. This is because Borka is a domain about secret intrigue and plots, underground societies, conspiring nobility, botanical monsters, and the ever-watchful presence of the Dark Lords or their servants. Because there's so much intrigue, and because Call of Cthulhu is a game about investigation, it would make sense to set Borka in Call of Cthulhu's rules. If you were going to set any domain of dread in Call of Cthulhu, that is. And on that same note, I would also recommend the domain of Invidia for Call of Cthulhu. Invidia is a domain of underground satanic cults, satanic influence, evil devilish or demonic influence, and otherworldly powers encroaching on our own. That's some Call of Cthulhu stuff right there. So if you're going to run Ravenloft in Call of Cthulhu, I would run the domains of Borka, Blutspur, and Invidia. Number 4. Heart, the City Beneath. I love Heart, the City Beneath by Rowan, Rook, and Deckard, and I've done a couple of videos about it too. In this game, the PCs are going on their last adventure. They are headed down deep into the darkness, and they're not coming back. As they head down into the darkness, they crumble and fall apart. Their limbs break, their psychological distress gets the better of them, and even their own identity unravels as the laws that tether them to this world begin to fray and sever. Eventually, they come to the very center, the ultimate goal, that thing deep beneath the earth that they were seeking, the heart itself. And at that point, they are obliterated. Heart, the City Beneath, in a certain way, is the anti-D&D. It's a game about getting worse and worse, getting more and more helpless and more trapped until you eventually die. And the goal is for your PC to die in the right way, in a satisfying way, to meet their life's goals and go out with a bang, as it were, and not to have their skull caved by a rock randomly in the dark. It's a dreary, tragic game about dungeon delving that really emphasizes the horror of dungeon delving. Because it's a game about getting closer and closer to some kind of unknowable doom that unravels reality and violates its laws, I think the domain of Chlor is perfect for Heart, the City Beneath. In the domain of Chlor, you've got that collection of solar systems, and they're moving towards the giant eye that's eating them up in space. And I imagine that as a solar system gets closer and closer to that eye, things get weirder and weirder, and it's like going deeper and deeper down into the heart. If you were running Chlor with the rules for Heart, the City Beneath, it would basically be like the heart is moving towards you instead of you moving towards it. And as it moves towards you, your surroundings change and you find new stuff there. That's what it would be like, and I think that would be really fun. I'd also recommend the Lighthouse domain from the Sea of Sorrows. When I did a video on the Lighthouse, I emphasized sea monsters, because I love sea monsters. But strictly speaking, according to the text of the Lighthouse, that description in Van Richten's guide, the real monster is deep, deep, deep beneath the lighthouse. There's supposed to be a cellar beneath the lighthouse, and then a basement beneath the cellar, and then a sub-basement beneath that basement, and I imagine you could say it goes down deeper, 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 getting weirder, weirder, and weirder, and you could basically use it as a setting for Heart, the City Beneath. I don't know what lies at the bottom of the lighthouse. The book doesn't really tell us, but hey, that's true about the heart as well. And finally, I would suggest Gastria as a really fun domain for the rules for Heart, the City Beneath. Why? Well, Gastria is a domain that is themed around paintings and magic portraits. And although it isn't described this way, I think it would be fun to have the paintings be sort of interactive, so that if you find a magic painting, you could travel into it and then explore the world that it depicts. So instead of going down further and further, getting closer and closer to the heart where things get weirder and weirder, it would be like this. The PCs are exploring some weird gothic place until they find the magic painting. They go into that painting. Then they have to find another painting, which they go into. Then they have to find another painting that they go into. Paintings to paintings, doorways to windows to doorways to windows, getting weirder and weirder the whole time until they find some ultimate, incomprehensible artistic truth or something. So that's what I have to say about running Ravenloft with the rules for Heart, the City Beneath. Go to the domains of Chlor, Gastria, or the Lighthouse from the Sea of Sorrows. Number 5. Monster of the Week. Monster of the Week is a really popular, really fun, powered by the Apocalypse game, which I got to play for about a year. And unlike the other games on this list, this one has a really light-hearted, whimsical feel to it. It'll introduce a cartoony feel to any kind of setting that you want to play with its rules. So the ideal Ravenloft Domains of Dread to suggest for Monster of the Week are going to be Domains of Dread which can at least accommodate a light-hearted, fun take on them. I know that every domain perhaps could do that to some degree, or maybe you'd argue no domain could do that to any degree. But when I think about playing Ravenloft in Monster of the Week, I immediately go to Cartacas. Why? Because Cartacas is the music-themed domain where there are lots of bands and performers and music everywhere, but there are also monsters, specifically werewolves, everywhere. This is a perfect domain for the PCs to be a traveling mystery-solving band, like the Scooby Gang or Josie and the Pussycats or whatever. They're going from club to venue to different performing area, and there's always some kind of weird mystery to figure out or solve. Is it werewolves this time? Or is it wolf wares? Or is it something else? Wolves. Cartacas seems to be a good domain for that. I'd also suggest Mordant. I love the domain of Mordant, and I love taking it really, really seriously and with a lot of gothic flair and panache. But you could also run Ghostbusters in Mordant. Your PCs are a group of people that investigate the paranormal and try to exorcise spirits. Maybe they do it with science and electricity. Maybe they're artificers. Maybe they call themselves the Gas Blasters. I don't know. But playing a team of paranormal researchers or supernatural pest control would work really well for the domain of Mordant. And finally, for Monster of the Week, I would suggest the Vague Agency. Now you might be wondering, why didn't I suggest the Vague Agency for Call of Cthulhu? It's an investigation bureau, isn't it? Right? It employs detectives and sends them out to solve mysteries. Call of Cthulhu is about solving mysteries. Why not put Vague Agency with Call of Cthulhu? Why put it with Monster of the Week? And the answer is simple. The Vague Agency only has one person in it. That person clearly has mysterious knowledge, and that person clearly has some secrets. They're the kind of NPC where no matter which game you put them in, the PCs are going to say, oh, that person's up to something, and they might just try to kill them right then and there, depending on what their character sheet has on it. Flamira Vague has all the innocence of Snidely Whiplash. So you don't want to put her in a game where the PCs are supposed to take her seriously. Unless it's 5e using the adventure that I wrote, maybe. So I think with Monster of the Week, she should be established as the PC's arch enemy, and the PCs should be indebted to her or controlled by her in some way where she can send them on missions. Each time the PCs do have to complete the mission for Flamira Vague, but they might also have a chance to undermine her in some way. And across different missions and mysteries that they solve, they might be able to gather the pieces to undermine their true foe, Flamira, who's been giving them the missions the whole time. That's some Monster of the Week stuff. So when it comes to running Ravenloft in Monster of the Week, I would suggest Cartacas, Mordant, and the Vague Agency. Number 6. Borg. I love playing Borg. I didn't think I would. I thought that it was going to be something generic, something that wasn't really thought out. I thought it was going to be a very simplistic OSR game that was just riding on the appeal of its aesthetics, but actually, it's very clever and very fun. The main thing about Borg is that it's horror comedy. It's a narrativist game, so it's mainly about the story and the situations that your PCs get into. But those stories and situations are so disgusting, gross, evil, immoral, gory, violent, and wrong that it's hilarious. This is a death metal TTRPG. This is a game where your PCs are wading through an ocean of sewage, or where they have to commit human sacrifice, or where they need to do drugs, or where they need to interact with cultists who are obviously demented and evil on favorable terms. This is a TTRPG where the PCs have to dig themselves out of a mass grave, and they better do it fast because the world is ending. It's hilariously horrible. So the first Ravenloft domain of dread I think would be fun to run using the rules for Borg is Falkovnia. In fact, the adventure, the swamp crawl Putrescence Regnant, could very well be set in Falkovnia. Falkovnia is desolate and blasted and apocalyptic with zombie hordes. Borg is desolate and blasted and apocalyptic, and you could put zombie hordes in it and it would be in the character of the setting. In fact, most of the adventures I've run with Borg have something like zombies in them. I would also suggest the domain of har'akir. In fact, that adventure I just mentioned, Putrescence Regnant, a swamp crawl, you could also turn that into a desert crawl and reskin it for har'akir. Putrescence Regnant has this race of cool crocodile people, or they're crocodile-headed people that are immortal and they want to die but they can't. It all has a very har'akir feel to it. I think of the crocodile-headed Sobek and so on. Har'akir is full of cultists, and it has a lot of people obsessed with death and the afterlife. It has this apocalyptic feel to it, and so it fits with Borg for that reason, I think. Also, I don't think there are many good adventures that are set in deserts for Borg, so, consider doing that. And also, because of the weirdness and the emphasis on cults, I would say Gehenna is a good domain for Borg rules. Gehenna has cultists and horrible swine people, and Borg has adventures like Bloat, which has what may as well be cultists and a horrible swine person. So if you're going to run Ravenloft Domains of Dread using the rules for Borg, I would suggest Falkovnia, har'akir, and Gehenna. Number 7. Ryutama. Ryutama is a really fun TTRPG about going on journeys. And I really have to stress this. It's about travel. It's not about the destinations, it's really about the journey. Making checks to see whether you can forage for food, making checks to see what the weather is like, making checks to see if you can navigate, and then having descriptions for all of those different checks and talking about those descriptions. Yes, there's combat, but it's pretty quick and simple and it goes by fast. Yes, you could put dungeons in Ryutama, but that's not really what the system is for. This is about, again, traveling. And for that reason, there are 3 domains of dread from Ravenloft that I think would work really well with Ryutama's rules. No matter what, however, I must stress that if you're going to run Ravenloft in Ryutama's rule set, you should use the black Ryujin. Don't use any of the other Ryujins. Use the black Ryujin and let the rules for playing the black Ryujin guide your campaign. The Black Ryujin, of course, is the PC player that focuses on tragedy and loss and sad things and gloomy and horrific things. It's the hardest Ryujin to run, at least according to the book itself, but it's the one you would want to pick if you're running horror with Ryutama. Now, the first domain I would pick is the domain of Rishmulo. Rishmulo is a land that's overrun with plague-carrying rats, and so you could see why there would be a need for travel. You need to get supplies from one area to another. You need to get scientific research from one area to another, and it's dangerous to cross between towns because of all of the rats and the rat monsters and things. In this way, Rishmulo is really well adapted to travel and themes about traveling. If I'm not mistaken, those video games, A Plague Tale or A Plague's Tale or whatever, those have a lot of travel and travel themes too, do they? Let me know in the comments. I also think the Writer's Bridge would be a really fun domain to run using the rules for Ryutama. As I conceive of it, at least, the Writer's Bridge is not just a little dirt path and a small covered bridge. No, the Writer's Bridge is a bridge. A big, expansive structure that stretches out further than anyone's eyesight can pierce, disappearing into the mist and ending up who knows where. At one end of the bridge, you of course have a small town, a cluster of people who will warn you about the dangers of going on that bridge from which nobody returns. There's legends about those who try to cross it. There's legends that say that the bridge will cross and crisscross and branch out and become a network of paths. But whether those are true, Since the very idea of a bridge brings ideas of crossing and journeys and travel with it, and because Ryutama is a game about that, that seems like a natural fit. And finally, the Sea of Sorrows. Here I don't mean any of the subdomains that are listed in Van Richten's guide, I mean the sea itself. The PCs could be going on a voyage, or multiple voyages, and as they go on their voyage, they could be accosted by some kind of nautical fell spirit that says, "Ooh, beware," and that could be the Black Ryujin. You could have Van Risa's ship appear like the Flying Dutchman, you could have sea monsters, all the fun stuff that could happen as you're journeying over the sea. So if you want to run Ravenloft and you want to do it with the rules for Ryutama, I would suggest using Rishmulo, the Writer's Bridge, or the Sea of Sorrows as domains. Number 8. 10 Candles. 10 Candles by Stephen Dewey is one of my favorite games. I love what I call narrative mechanics, or what other people might call prompts for rule-governed creative expression. And 10 Candles has this in abundance. This isn't a game where you're rolling dice to try to hit the number and keep track of my hit points and, ooh, my hit points, I hope I don't lose my hit points, I hope I get more hit points rather than less hit points. It's not that kind of game. This is a game about plot. It's about drama. It's about rising and falling action and tension and character arcs and development. And doom. This is a game about the world coming to an end and the PCs getting cornered and trapped and dying. That's what the game is about. It's actually called a tragic horror TTRPG because of its nihilism or pessimism, or because all the PCs are sort of doomed. It's a really fun game though. I really encourage you to check it out and play it, and it makes sense to me to run Ravenloft with the rules for 10 Candles. And if you did that, you would want to choose a domain with a lot of disaster horror, or at least with the potential for some kind of alien, outside, or mysterious force to invade and end everything. So the first domain I think of course, is Darkon. Darkon is a domain of dread, where a mist that eats reality is consuming the very land, like the Nothing from the Neverending Story. It would make sense for cities to lose their infrastructure, lose their resources, society to fall apart, and for the PCs to get more and more trapped and cornered. You could say that monsters are coming out of the mist. Maybe they're part of the mist itself. Normally, in games of 10 Candles, the PCs and the GM together collaborate to tell a story that reveals what the monsters are like, and this would be fun to do with the mist monsters of Darkon. I also think the domain of Haslin is a natural fit for 10 Candles. Haslin, of course, is a domain where wizards are everywhere and they're all up to dangerous experiments. The inciting event of your 10 Candles game in Haslin, therefore, could be a wizard who summoned something too powerful, or discovered something too powerful. He opened a gateway to Dimension X and now they are coming for us. That would work with 10 Candles. And also Gerisia. I love the domain of Gerisia. I think my video on it is one of my best. And the idea of subterranean people that are down there, that are controlling us or manipulating us, and it's only a matter of time before they swarm up and take over, that works really well with 10 Candles. The ominous, anonymous, yet-to-be-elaborated them who invade and destroy the world, they could be the creatures that come up from Gerisia's sewers. I think that would be really fun anyway. If you're going to play 10 Candles and you want to do Ravenloft in it, try out the domain of Gerisia, or Haslan, or Darkon. Number 9. 5 Acts, The King in Yellow RPG. 5 Acts, The King in Yellow RPG by Nilhemoth Games is the game for which I was the creative director and chief designer, and we successfully meet our Kickstarter goal back in August. This is a game where PCs control unreliable narrators who have read The King in Yellow. Each of the PCs has read the forbidden stage play The King in Yellow, and they now believe themselves to be in contact with morbid theological powers that have granted them supernatural abilities. Gameplay proceeds as if they have those powers, and their powers escalate and grow over the course of 5 serial parts, or acts. The PCs go back and forth between being awake and being asleep, ultimately finding the yellow sign and building up their powers to apocalyptic proportions. It's a one-shot game where everything seems to come to a fantastical end, but then there's a debriefing phase, and we consider whether the PC's perspective was accurate. This is a game about unreliable narrators. It's the game where the PCs could be powerful cultists with supernatural power, or they could be deluded, and the game does not really decide for you. So what we want are Ravenloft domains that fit with themes of dreams and delirium and delusion, as well as themes that go along with The King in Yellow, such as decadence and artistic finery. You might think Gastria, and yes, that would be a good fit, but I also think of the domain of Seina. I haven't yet done a video on this domain, but I'm going to. Seina is a domain that is ruled by a playwright. With the power of his pen and paper, furthermore, this playwright, Justa is his name, I believe, this playwright can control reality, or at least the appearance of reality. The domain is basically a Star Trek holodeck that he can control with the power of his pen. Whether the domain is real at all, whether it seems to contain the elements that it contains, whether everything is being secretly overseen by some kind of narrative body, all of these are themes that would work really well with 5 Acts, The King in Yellow. As the PCs go back and forth between waking scenario and nightmare, they could go back and forth between encounters with the playwright Justa and finding themselves trapped within his works. I also think the domain of Ikath would work really well with the rules for 5 Acts The King in Yellow. In 5 Acts The King in Yellow, PCs go back and forth between being awake and having nightmares, being awake and having nightmares. The nightmares are monstrous and threatening, and the waking scenarios are weird and creepy. Ikath is a domain that is divided between waking and nightmare. You could set the waking portions in the desolate, rundown city of Ikath, and set the nightmares in the golden, glowing dream version. The PCs could be searching for, like, the missing piece of the Nightingale Bell or something, and then at the end you could also have a kind of debriefing phase. And I think the Nightmare Lands would work pretty well for 5 Acts The King in Yellow. Again, 5 Acts The King in Yellow features PCs who go back and forth between being awake and having nightmares. The Nightmare Lands is a domain made up of nightmares, but it's anchored in a mundane location. Instead of saying that the PCs have read The King in Yellow, you could say that the PCs have read the work of Dr. Ilusen, and they think they've discovered an incredible destiny within his work, or something like that. The basic idea is that you want to pick a domain of dread, where there's going to be a question about whether the supernatural goings-on within it are actually real and actually happening. The Nightmare Lands, Seina, and Ikath, I think, are all good for this purpose. Number 10. The Extraordinary Adventures of Baron Munchausen. Okay, the last item on this list is kind of a joke. The Extraordinary Adventures of Baron Munchausen is a really fun game, but it's kind of a drinking game. You don't have to use alcohol with it. You could also have it be with cookies or biscuits. The actual book uses biscuits. But it's a game about bragging and telling stories. So one player is going to say, well, I never sneeze when I'm near a panda on account of what happened when I met the King of the Moon. And some other player is going to say, oh, tell us about when you met the King of the Moon. And you're supposed to prompt each other to elaborate on ridiculous stories. And if somebody flubs or is flapped when they're trying to elaborate, or they can't quite think of something, then they have to take a drink or eat a biscuit or something like that. And eventually whoever runs out of biscuits is out of the game, and you're just left with one person who's the best storyteller. I recall that's more or less how it works. It's been a while since I've played it. But anyway, the one Ravenloft domain of dread that would be really fun to play with this game's rules is Risibolos. And the idea is this. All of the players are taking up the role of somebody who claims to be the real Strahd von Zarovich. And what they're doing is they're establishing their legitimacy, or trying to, by bragging about the amazing things that they have done which only Strahd could have done. You can't leave this grounded in Barovia, because things have to get ridiculous for the game to be fun. You're going to have to talk about how only the real Strahd could balance the entirety of Castle Ravenloft on the tip of his nose, or something like that. But that fits with a domain. A Risibolos-themed game of the extraordinary adventures of Baron Munchausen is absolutely possible and would absolutely be fun. If you have a copy of that game, you might want to try that, in fact. So anyway, there are 10 TTRPGs that are outside of Dungeons & Dragons that you could run Ravenloft in. I've listed what I think are the best domains of dread to run in each of those systems, but what do you think? Are there some games that I should look at to include and add to this list? Or are there domains of dread which you think would be better fits than for the ones I've assigned? Let me know in the comments. In the meantime, thanks very much. Don't forget to do all the internet things, click like and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the bell icon if you want notifications about new videos on this channel, and thanks.